So the interesting thing here is that what religion does is it takes any of these. So physics applies to, of course, plants, animals, and persons, right? People also obey the laws of physics. Biology applies to, again, for animals and plants, but not the substances. And psychology applies to all of these except for plants. Of course, we don't impute psychology to plants. So what we can do, what can happen then is if we take any of these relationships and then change it, transfer one feature from one domain to another, for example, then you get a supernatural intuition. So a ghost is basically a person that violates the principles of physics. Ghosts can pass through objects, can see people from a distance or hear people from a distance, etc. Similarly, a talisman is a substance that has psychological properties, right? So even though we understand that in our everyday understanding, we don't attribute physical mentality to physical objects, but if we do, we get a supernatural intuition, and that's what supernatural beliefs are. And if you do this, you can play around with this, and you can get a menu of supernatural beliefs that we think explain the range of possible cultural beliefs around the world. At least gives you a good starting point to understand what supernatural beliefs are. I'll give you an example of how that this is a fruitful way of thinking about supernatural beliefs, because it helps us also understand why is that some of these beliefs propagate, become popular, and others don't. And there's a term that is used in this field called minimally counterintuitive beliefs. And that basically refers to what I just described to you, like the ghost or a talisman. One violation, but not more than, we don't want too many violations. And what we can find is that when we look at religions, even when we look at folk tales, for example, we find that there's an interesting plethora of these kinds of beliefs in these texts that have survived. Well, these are oral traditions, of course, now that they're written down, but they used to be oral traditions. So here is a study that I did with some colleagues where we analyzed Grimm brother folktales. And we did two things. We measured how culturally successful these folktales were, and we did that by doing two things. We asked people to tell us how familiar they are with these folktales. So, for example, how many of you have heard Cinderella? How many of you know Cinderella? How many of you know Donkey Lettuce? It's in the Grimm Brothers collection. How come you haven't heard of it? So that's the point. So now we have variability, right? In the same way that in evolutionary genetics, you can see that some gene frequencies are quite widespread, others aren't, and then you try to explain why that is. We can do the same thing in cultural evolution. We can look at why is it that people recognize Cinderella but not the donkey lettuce. I couldn't even find a picture for it, even though I tried. And our hypothesis was that if there is a certain number of minimal counterintuitions in the folktale, then these folktales will be better remembered. And if they're better remembered, they're more likely to be told in oral traditions. If they're more likely to be told, they're going to be more popular. We also did Google hits, by the way. We just counted the number of Google hits on the internet in German and English, and we find the same thing. Those familiar ones have more Google hits. Here is a graph that we plotted in this research. So what you see here is frequency of successful and unsuccessful folktales. So white is unsuccessful folktales, like the donkey lettuce, and the black bars are the number of successful folktales. And then here is the number of counterintuitive elements that we counted in each folktale. And what we found is this very interesting pattern. There's a dose-dependent relationship between counterintuitiveness and cultural success. We found that the culturally successful folktales were overwhelmingly those that had between 2 and 3 minimal counterintuitions. If a folktale had more than 2 or less than more than 3 or more than 2, more than 3 or less than 2, then they were not as successful. So this is a curvilinear relationship. if you add a few mineral contributions to a story, it becomes really catchy. It becomes interesting to think about. It becomes easier to remember, and then people are more likely to tell the story. And as a result, they survive. They do better in the cultural marketplace than stories that have no contributions at all. There's nothing supernatural that's happening, or there's so many supernatural things happening, you can't wrap your head around it, in which case we can't process the information. And we think that, although the research hasn't been done yet, we think that probably the same process happens in religious narratives, where again you have to have this kind of, you have to balance number of supernatural intuitions with comprehensibility. Okay, so going back to the concept of God, so like I said, the argument here is that our understanding of God or supernatural agents in general comes out of our ability to detect or understand the minds of other human beings, the content of other minds. That's the innate core. That's the genetically evolved capacity we have. But once that capacity is there, they can be exploited in the ways that I just described to you, culturally exploited. Now that we have this hypersensitive capacity, we're always trying to figure out the minds of other people, then it's a very small step from there to believe that there could be minds without bodies, right? And that's basically what supernatural agents are. They're agents that have minds, but they don't obey they're not constrained by physics the way that human beings are. Furthermore, and this is going to prove really important for understanding religion's social functions, some of these supernatural agents that can have moral qualities, meaning that people might believe that these agents may be concerned about human morality, right? In the same way that other human beings are concerned about human morality. These are moralizing supernatural agents. These are the big gods. Once we have moralizing supernatural agents, then they can do a lot of stuff for human beings. They can relieve existential concerns, the problem of death, and perhaps more importantly, they can also solve the problem of cooperation in large groups, which is something I'm going to talk about in a second. Okay. So starting with existential concerns, the idea that religion relieves existential concerns, like the problem of death, has of course been around for many years. The former comedian Al Franken, I think now senator, put it this way. He said, "Religion is a fire extinguisher. You never know when you are going to need it, so it's best to have one handy." He was saying this in a commencement speech, talking to university graduates. So he's saying, "I know you don't think that you need religion right now, but trust me, put it in your closet. You're going to need it someday." Was he onto something? Well, many researchers believe that he was. Here is the problem that humanity has to face. This is something that every human being in every culture has to deal with. The problem is that we have an instinct for survival. Yet, unlike other animals, we have the awareness of the inevitability of our own death. It's just a basic inductive inference, right? Once you are consciously aware of our own experience, our own lives, and the lives of people close to us, we realize that everyone has to die someday. This is the tragedy of cognition. The fact that we have this cognitive capacity to self-reflect has this unfortunate consequence, is that it forces us to realize our own mortality. There is no solution to this. The reason you cannot give you a solution to this problem, right? But perhaps supernatural agents, morally concerned supernatural agents, who transcend illusion, death, deception, who govern, who have superhuman qualities, could provide some sort of relief in the form of afterlife. So this idea has been around for a long time, and there is some cross-cultural evidence for this, in the sense that in societies where there is more existential security, when people live longer, they have better access to healthcare, they are not dealing with death on a daily basis, infant mortality is low, for example. These are the very countries or cultures that also have low religiosity, right? And conversely, when the existential problems are acute, people are more religious. There's extensive sociological evidence for this. But of course, the evidence is correlational. Can we find experimental evidence for it? So a few years ago, we did an experiment where we actually planted thoughts of death in our participants. Okay, we had them reflect on their own death. And then, under the guise of a different experiment, so after they thought about that, they thought that the experiment was done. Then we said, now we're doing a different experiment. And in the guise of this different experiment, we asked them a number of questions. And some of the questions were about, do you believe in God? Are you religious? And here's what we found.